Hello and welcome. I'm Leanne Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios in Riyadh. These are our top stories. The US blasts Iran in retaliation for striking their bases in Jordan, but Pakistan mediators believe they can still bring both parties together. Meanwhile, 8 people are dead in Ukraine after Russia launches drones and missiles days after Zelensky's meeting with President Trump. And UEFA votes to boycott the World Cup if FIFA sells stakes in its competitions. The US has conducted more strikes against Iran in response to the attack on US military bases in Jordan. CENTCOM says it fired at dozens of IRGC targets, which Iranian media says has killed 3 people. Meanwhile, Pakistan, who have acted as mediators, continue their attempts to bring the US and Iran back to the table. Take a listen.
We are doing utmost to bring the parties back to the Islamabad MOU, so that all irritants can be removed in the light of the spirit of the Islamabad MOU and the Pakistan-Qatar joint statement. We encourage the parties to exercise maximum restraint and fully adhere to their commitment to resume technical level talks for the implementation of the Islamabad MOU in line with Pakistan-Qatar joint statement of.
Let's get the thoughts and opinions of former Major General Chip Chapman, a former British advisor to CENTCOM. Chip, it's always great to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Iran has now been stepping up its attacks on US military bases across the Middle East following a series of US strikes. Chip, are we just on the escalation ladder right now?
Well, nothing is inevitable until it happens, and I don't think we are on an escalation spiral, really. But I think what we're doing at the moment is we're having skirmishes on multiple fronts. Now, there has been some horizontal escalation in terms of, for example, some sort of strike in Egypt and the joint attack by Saudi Arabia and America on the PMF, Popular Mobilization Front in Iraq. But we look for patterns, not for single events. So I think all those can be controlled at the moment, because I think both sides don't want to escalate to all-out war. Now, we still have rhetoric on that. For example, the president of Iran said that they're back to a full-scale war. I don't think they are. And of course, we've had major language from President Trump the last day, which you couldn't quote on any TV program, and talk about major combat operations, which from a US perspective would be about large-scale, high-intensity operations. But what that looks like at the moment is the upper end of planning seriousness, not necessarily operational intent to escalate without any sort of ledger. And the ledger is still there where lots could be done by both sides. So, for example, Iran is really being quite constrained in one aspect, and that is that they haven't held at risk the infrastructure and oil targets of the Gulf countries at the moment. They've not re-attacked any targets in Israel. So there's still lots they could do. So at the moment, I would say it's still proportionate retaliation. I don't think we're in this escalation spiral.
And I just want to talk a little bit about Iran's strategy, Chip, if we can, because an Iranian attack has also struck a Chinese-owned building in Kuwait. This has killed 1 worker and actually caused significant damage. What does Iran's strike on a civilian building suggest about Tehran's strategy and also pressure on regional countries?
Well, we know that at the strategic level, one of the things that Iran seeks to do is to have the removal of American bases from the Middle East. So in strategic terms, you could say that all the attacks they are doing would play into that. And that, in their original points for the ceasefire, would have been one of those. In terms of the specifics of the attack in Kuwait, that to me would look like more of a targeting error, because there is a thing called the circular error of probability to do with either missiles or drones. And certainly if you've been receiving targeting data, which the Americans have absolutely said from the Chinese and the Russians, then the last thing you would do is attack potentially a target which has people of a friendly country towards your objectives. So I think that's more to do with targeting errors rather than part of that a strategy. But the strategy ultimately is to remove American bases from the Middle East.
I want to talk a little bit about what you just said to me about proportionate and constraint. You saying that Israel could still do a lot, Iran could still do a lot more, so we're not in that full-scale escalation. My question is really, could the US be doing more too? Are we seeing constraint on the US side because Israel has not been involved in this latest wave of attacks?
Well, America could do more. And I've said many times that America has escalation dominance. But one of the reasons we came to the original ceasefire was because President Trump said that the war needed to end because of the dangers to the global oil supply. That was really, to my mind, going back to the American foreign policy model of pragmatic realism. And the problem for the Americans at the moment is at the tactical level, the Americans are awesome at striking targets, but that's all they're doing at the moment. They're servicing targets. And I think there were two significant things in the last week. Firstly, General Kane, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in America, said at a Senate congressional hearing that if you look across the totality of history, air power's got limits and we have to be mindful of those. And if you do a major combat operation without land power and the Americans are not willing to put land power on the ground, then you're getting the law of diminishing returns. You're not getting a strategic outcome. That is, Iran does not feel it's compelled by the Americans, and that's why it feels it has the freedom to continue to do these strikes, the sort of surprise strike, so-called, on Jordan. Now, at the military level, that is not a surprise attack, because the guard of the American forces in Jordan would have meant that if force protection is a responsibility, not a mission, they'd have been on high alert. I think where you could say it's a surprise is that politically it would have been a surprise because Trump had stopped the bombing after 13 days and nights to give the space for some sort of diplomatic furtherment to take place.
And with the conflict now spreading beyond Iran to Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Egypt, and of course the Strait of Hormuz, which has been a flashpoint, Chip, do you think this conflict is becoming harder to contain now across the region?
No, I don't. And again, I think that's one of the constraints on the use of American power, that containing the conflict is obviously one of the prime objectives of the Gulf states because of the consequences if it does flare up into this spiral escalation. Particularly, again, because of those things to do with the ports, the oil infrastructure, and the requirement for the Gulf states to have the gas and oil flow. The reality at the moment is, although America on a daily basis says that the combat power of the Iranians is degraded, the real metric which matters to the Gulf states at the moment is how much oil and gas is flowing through that strait. And it's still down 70 or 80%, regardless of the Americans saying it's open and regardless of the Iranians saying it's closed. From the perspective of risk management, it looks far more closed than it does open.
So, Chip, would you say that this is becoming an energy warfare that has been led by Iran and the US is almost following the lead at the moment?
Well, all wars are fought for political objectives, not for economic objectives. And the politicians of the world are not bookkeepers and accountants. So it's making sure that you know what those those political objectives are. That has always been one of the burdens from the American side, that they're not quite clear what the political objectives are. We know that they don't want Iran to have a nuclear weapon in the future, but you could do that diplomatically, as was done under the JCPOA. And of course, prior to the 28th of February, the Strait of Hormuz was open. Two other things that they'd really like is obviously to render the ballistic missile capability of the Iranians obsolete. Iran is not going to negotiate that way because it sees that as its strategic deterrent for the future. And of course, it would like to rein in the proxies, partly, I think, while we've seen this attack on the PMF in Iraq over the last couple of days.
Oh, Chip, have we lost you? Did you want to finish your thought?
No, I think I'd finish with what we saw in the last couple of days there, Leanne.
Former Major General Chip Chapman, great to have you on as always. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let's continue this conversation with Daniel Roth, Research Director at United Against Nuclear Iran. Daniel, can we just pick up there on what Chip Chapman was saying about the nuclear situation in Iran? That, he said, can be done diplomatically. Would you agree?
I think the window for diplomacy passed probably last year, once President Trump decided to take that kinetic action along with the Israelis during Operation Midnight Hammer back in June 2025. I would say that the US has nonetheless offered always a window for negotiation. I mean, I think President Trump has given the Iranians multiple chances, including last month with that memorandum of understanding, which to most analysts looked like Iran had won. Iran had dictated the terms of surrender to a defeated United States. It looks like in hindsight that the president kind of knew what was going to happen. He understood that the Iranians would not help themselves with their absolutely maximalist demands, which were then carried out. They just cannot help themselves when it comes to just taking a breath, appreciating that they're not going to be the dominant player in the region, that kind of thing. So I think the JCPOA, which Chip, your previous guest there, Chip Chapman, was saying, could have worked. It was always a bad deal. It was, as they say, just a way to kick the can down the road, if not for this generation, then a future generation. So the nuclear issue was never going away. This is, at the end of the day, Iran's card that it can play to ensure its overriding objective, which is regime survival. If it has that nuclear umbrella, then it makes regime survival almost guaranteed, because who is going to attack or degrade a country with nuclear weapons?
And Daniel, that's a really good point. And you spoke about the JCPOA being a bad deal and kicking the nuclear situation down the road in many respects. But right now we seem further away from nuclear talks than ever between the US and Iran, and a deal. We haven't even got the Strait of Hormuz open.
It's true that we are further from a deal, but that doesn't preclude the option that the nuclear program can be taken out in other ways. And I would suggest the most likely option right now, and the best option, is to go in there with some more airstrikes. Again, your previous guest is right to say that airstrikes cannot effectuate political change a lot of the time, but if you have these clear military nuclear targets, they're all mapped out very clearly, you can achieve some pretty amazing things. I mean, absolutely, we're in a better position if you're not part of the Iranian regime. If you're in the region, in the West, we're in a much better position in terms of Iran's nuclear threat than we were before June 2025, and I would also suggest before February of this year, because the US has decided to take clear action against those nuclear sites. It's obvious to anybody that Iran is not interested in really saying, okay, we're just going to have a civilian nuclear program. It wants those nuclear military capabilities. Nothing is going to change that. And unfortunately, this is, to me, seems like the only way. If military action forces Iran to back down, comes to the negotiating table, then I would welcome that. But I think it's going to take a lot more than what we're seeing right now.
And let's talk about what we're seeing right now, because the US says the strikes were a direct response to Iran's missile attacks on Jordan. That's the strikes we saw overnight. Do you think we are now just trapped in a cycle of escalation and de-escalation? It just seems to be in a vicious cycle at the moment.
Well, let's consider the sequence. I think CENTCOM is pretty accurate to say that these were directly a direct response to Iran's IRGC ballistic missiles against the Azraq US base in Jordan. I think there's no dispute about that. and there's no dispute that the US must respond. It can't absorb Iranian attacks with no consequence. What I would say that there is a little bit of tit for tat in this, and even though it was described by the US as heavy round of strikes, I don't think it's really going to change the psychological calculus of the Iranians. We've seen that the IRGC is almost unaffected by military degradation, as I say, in terms of their mindset, of their thinking. But at least we can say in the most basic way, at least they have fewer missiles and drones and launch sites. So really, the US has no choice; it must respond. And I would even suggest that they respond in a heavier kind of way next time, because there will be a next time.
And there is still a great deal of uncertainty surrounding the conflict. But if meaningful negotiations are to resume, which side will have to blink first and make the biggest concessions?
Well, again, that MOU was such a good encapsulation of the US side and how they're approaching it, and the Iranian side. Really, the Iranians got almost everything that they could have dreamt of, especially being under so much pressure, military plus the economic blockade in tandem. The US President Trump has always said, we would much prefer diplomacy, but the Iranians just will not accept it. So in terms of who's going to blink first, the US could easily reopen the strait, but obviously President Trump has to think about the 3 M's, the midterms in November, munitions, which it is limited. It's not an unlimited supply, and it has to think about the markets, the oil prices. So President Trump has to think this is not just one military versus another. I think there would be no dispute about who would win that, but he has to think about the domestic politics, the regional politics, and beyond. So yeah, tough to say who's going to blink first. Clearly, the Iranians, they've shown that they can hold out because they are, as I say, psychologically unaffected by military targets, and that's why I suggest we should keep the US blockade in place. And the things that Iran really does care about are targets like its Basij militias, those police headquarters, even courthouses in Tehran, but also it needs money to pay its IRGC. They're not simply going to keep on working for free. So those are 3 things I think the US might look at as well.
And I just want to discuss about what's been happening in Egypt, because obviously this happened yesterday and we started getting reports about it. But an unidentified drone has struck vessels at Egypt's Dimyat port, close to the Suez Canal. How serious is the threat to this vital shipping route? Because obviously we see a threat to the Strait of Hormuz and also the Bab el-Mandeb Strait.
Yeah, so really intriguing development, because we don't know officially who launched these. We do know they were drones. The Egyptians have said that it was a drone that struck a US-owned gas floating storage unit, so an American ship, essentially. The fire then affected a second ship in that Egyptian port of Damietta. I did see, however, New York Times reporting that heavily implied that it was an Iranian drone. I would be very surprised if an Iranian drone managed to launch from Iranian territory all the way to Egypt without, the Israelis or even the US in those bases seeing it. So, the finger of blame might be going to the Houthis, which are an Iranian partner, if not a proxy. They are very well versed in that Red Sea area, even though this is on the Mediterranean side of the Suez Canal. But again, they've strongly denied it. So very, very interesting. In terms of, yes, it brings Egypt into the theater of conflict. Egypt, the fact that they didn't go beyond the fact that they said this was a drone suggests that they really do not want to be drawn in. This is the first time that it's reached Egypt, so that's significant as well. But yeah, as we see, the Egyptians, they don't want to be drawn in, especially because it's such a huge burden to their economy. We saw the Suez Canal being closed for, I think it was about 18 months, a couple of years ago, with the Houthis threatening. So they really don't want to see that happening. And that's why we see them downplaying what happened yesterday, yes.
Yeah, indeed, it was yesterday. Daniel Roth, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much for your analysis and time with me.
Thank you so much.
Saudi Arabia's Defense Minister, Prince Khalid bin Salman, has met with President Trump and Vice President Vance hours after a joint US-Saudi strike on Iran-backed militias. Prince Khalid told the administration the kingdom would not tolerate attacks on its energy infrastructure or civilian targets. It comes as Saudi Arabia seeks to build an international coalition to protect shipping in the Red Sea. I'm now joined by Dr. Hesham Alghannam, Director and Senior Geopolitical Researcher at the Gulf Research Centre. Dr. Hesham, absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your time with me. The US has completed a heavy wave of strikes on Iran in retaliation for attacks on US military assets in the region. Are we reaching a new escalation phase? And what is Saudi's stance and strategy?
Well, thank you for having me. Just a small correction. I'm not affiliated with the Gulf Research Center at all. To answer your question directly, yes, and I think this was predictable. Iran's hardline factions spent at least the past 6 weeks testing American limits across every front simultaneously. So we had the Strait, the Red Sea, Iraq, Jordan, and at some point, the accumulation of attacks was going to produce a response that goes beyond targeting Iranian proxies in the region. Mm-hmm. And frankly, the real question would be about the ceiling and the limits, because right now, neither Tehran nor Washington appears to be signaling one. But I think that what is also important is the kingdom strategy. And I think that it's important to understand where the kingdom stands today. I think we need to see everything that has happened this week, especially, not as a separate or a standalone event, but as one coherent picture. The kingdom has conducted joint strikes in Iraq with the Americans. Its defense minister, as you stated, is in Washington. The kingdom also is building what it seems as an international coalition for the Red Sea, and is publicly also backing Arab partners against the Iranian attacks. In my opinion, all of these should be seen as different pieces of a single unified strategy that the Saudis are working on.
And with the conflict now spreading beyond Iran, what is Tehran trying to achieve, and what does it risk going wrong?
In my view, the Iranian hardline faction has one clear goal, which is keeping enough pressure going across enough fronts that Washington cannot close the file before November midterms. The goal is quite clear, which is forcing Trump to choose between acting or backing down in a way Iran can call a win. And it's not random. I mean, the pressure across the Strait, the Red Sea, Iraq, and now the idea of pulling other states into the conflict, I think it's an orchestrated and a planned effort to make any pre-November deal politically impossible for Trump. The risk, and I think that this is the crucial part here, is the same one that has repeatedly hurt Iran, which is assuming American limits are permanent. And if Iran goes far and gives Trump a clear domestic reason to act before November, it will certainly have handed its enemy exactly the opening he needed.
And Saudi Arabia and the US have carried out joint strikes against Iran-backed militias in Iraq. This is the first time the kingdom has publicly acknowledged taking part in such an operation. What did you make of the timing of this?
You know what, I have to say that the strikes came after more than 30 drones attacks in less than 72 hours, targeting US forces and also the kingdom's main oil facilities. They were all from Iraq. The kingdom had warned Baghdad repeatedly that attacks coming from Iraq would not go unanswered. And I think that the warning was serious and meant to be taken seriously. We had 4 Iranians military advisors that were killed alongside the militia fighters, which I believe will send and should send a clear message to Tehran and also Baghdad. The Iraqi also, on the other side, the Iraqi prime minister canceled his this planned Riyadh visit, which is a real cost. But in my view, the kingdom judged that letting attacks on its oil infrastructure goes unanswered would cause more damage over time than any diplomatic friction with Baghdad at the current moment.
And Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia has also strongly condemned Iran's repeated missile and drone attacks on Jordan. Does this signal a more assertive Saudi role in confronting Iranian aggression across the region? Because we have also just been talking about that possible coalition in the Red Sea and other areas.
Exactly. But if you allow me, I just want to add one point about Saudi and Iraq, because I think that the economic relationship and also the relationship between the two countries is important. And I do not believe that the kingdom has any interest in walking away from years of investment in Iraq. Me myself being a big advocate for such investments, but this, which I think it's a very important relationship between Baghdad and Riyadh, would depend primarily on Baghdad being able to govern its own territory. As simple as that. The cancellation of the Iraqi Prime Minister visit to Riyadh is a setback, but it's not the end of the relationship. I think that the real test is the end of September, when the militias are supposed to hand over their weapons on the same day U.S. forces complete their withdrawal from Iraq. But honestly, when the militia leaders publicly mock the Iraqi government ability to enforce that, this is, in my view, gives the kingdom a very clear answer about whether this partnership can hold or not. So, and I would say if September passes without enforcement of the militias handing over their weapons, the relationship will need to be seriously reconsidered between the two countries, the Saudis and the Iraqis. Now, when it comes to your question, see, we had at least three formal statements in 3 weeks, each stronger than the last, ending with the kingdom strongly backing Jordan's right to respond to Iranian attacks. And I think this is crucial. This is important. This is not a routine diplomatic gesture. It's clearly, there is a clear direction that the kingdom is building what I call a legal and a political record here, grounded in a UN Security Council resolution requiring Iran to stop attacking regional states. This, in my view, establishes a collective Arab self-defense as a legitimate right. And what is worth noting there is the shift from condemning attacks to endorsing a response. And I believe this is very significant. It gives Arab partners political cover to act and also lays the foundation of the Red Sea coalition we were talking about. It's clear to me that the kingdom is building the framework of a collective Arab response before it becomes unavoidable.
Dr. Hesham Alghannam, it was brilliant to have you on the show. Thank you so much for your analysis. We need to get you on more. It's always a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
8 people, including 3 children, are dead after a Russian missile and drone attack on Ukraine. President Zelensky says homes, businesses and infrastructure facilities were hit as Polish jets scrambled to protect their airspace. Zelensky had previously warned that an attack was coming 1 day after he met President Trump in Washington. Let's go live to Odessa to speak to Ukrainian MP Oleksiy Goncharenko. As always, Oleksiy, thank you so much for your time and thank you for joining me. Russia says it targeted military sites, but Zelensky says homes and businesses were hit and entire families were killed. What does this latest attack tell us about Russia's strategy, and has it changed at all?
Hello, Russian strategy hasn't changed. They put as much terror as possible on ordinary people. That is Russian war playbook. Brutal, barbaric, just killing civilians in big numbers. And when they're saying we're taking military targets, who is military target? Children and families just in their houses were killed. So it's clear that Russia, unfortunately, continues this terror campaign.
Alesky, Russia targeted the capital and also several regions across the country. Does the scale and geographical spread of these attacks suggest Moscow is now trying to completely overwhelm Ukraine and Ukraine's defense systems?
I think Russia is trying to use the window of opportunity that they have because Ukraine lacks anti-ballistic missiles, which we badly need and which we don't have for the moment in needed numbers. So they use this possibility, attacking, again, just civilian infrastructure. The fact that they were attacking the whole territory of Ukraine just shows that they continue to attack everything they can. So I think there is no use in this, but we really badly need support from our allies just to save many, many lives. And it's, very, very difficult to accept that our allies today, they have these anti-ballistic missiles, and for the moment, they don't need them. And Ukrainians are dying every day from Russian ballistics. And we can't receive what we need from our allies. It's really very difficult for us.
Yes, and when we speak quite often, we always come across this, don't we? Alesky, you always tell me how frustrating it is that the Allies aren't doing enough when it comes to the Patriot missile systems. But you talked about a window of opportunity, and some experts say Moscow is trying to exploit the disruption caused by high-level changes within Ukraine's military. Do you think these leadership changes in the military have affected Ukraine's ability to defend the front line?
Russia is attacking all the time with these military leadership, with previous one, with the one before this. So it doesn't matter. For the moment, yes, we in Ukraine, Commander-in-Chief was changed. But it's very early to say what are the consequences of this. Some people hope that the situation will be better. Some are afraid that it can be worse. I think we need just time because it's too early to say anything because it's just several days left, several days passed after this decision. There is vulnerability from the fact that in Ukraine we don't have a legitimate Ministry of Defense now. Also, we don't have a legitimate Minister of Foreign Affairs, legitimate head of Secret Service, legitimate head of Foreign Intelligence Service. And it's quite strange, and even I would say ridiculous. Unfortunately, President Zelensky is making some moves which are quite hard to understand. And maybe they are more based on his personal feelings and emotions on some, because he's afraid of some competition from his former members of his team. I don't know. But this is a problem because I don't like the fact that, for example, ministers of defense in Ukraine are changed so often. But it doesn't, it's not connected with these Russian attacks. Russia just attacking all the time.
And Ukraine continues to strike targets deep inside of Russia, causing significant damage. But do you think these attacks are actually having a real impact on Russia's ability to fight the war?
Definitely, yes. Definitely, it's very painful for Russia. Yes, Russia is a big country. And they, for the moment, they managed to continue the war efforts despite the losses they have recently. But it's the question of tipping point. At some moment, the next attack will cause a failure for Russia, for Russian economy, may cause a failure. So we don't know. But Ukraine is not looking for this moment. Ukraine looks for peace. We want peace as soon as possible. And the only reason why the war still continues is because Russia refuses to end the war on the current lines, which is the only viable option and logical option. Because for the last 3 years, the front line hasn't changed almost at all. Very tiny changes for both sides. So people are just dying for nothing. It's time to end this war. And Putin just doesn't want to do this. I hope these Ukrainian attacks and Ukrainian capacity to reach long-range targets from Ukrainian border will make Putin to accept that the war should be stopped.
Alexei Goncharenko, as always, it's really great to have you on the show. Stay safe and thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
UEFA has voted to boycott FIFA's tournaments if the federation sells stakes in the World Cup to outside investors. The decision by European members was made during a crisis meeting after several days of backlash. FIFA believe the plan would generate fresh revenue and also boost grassroots programs. Wandi Intengento has this report.
It is a golden opportunity to turbocharge the development of the game. Too little of football's growing commercial value reaches the parts of the game that need it most. It would simply commercialize and organize all FIFA-owned competitions.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino continuing to defend his plan of selling stakes of the organization to outside investors, while potential shareholders will own a fraction of the body's commercial subsidiary. They will have no influence over decisions made by FIFA. However, top brass in the association said what fueled the furnace was learning through a leaked report that a substantial percentage could be bought by one of US President Donald Trump's in-law.
Let me say this very clearly. Football does not belong to investors. It belongs to the people who fill the stands, who stand on the touchlines week in, week out, rain or shine. The World Cup is not a product. It is the greatest competition in the world, and it was never anyone's to sell. Dress the deal up however you like. Once you have sold a piece of it, you have sold out. Football belongs to the supporters. It always has, and it always will.
FIFA President Gianni Infantino's controversial proposal will need a majority vote from 211 members on September 19th. FIFA believe the deal will unlock a $10 billion funding package from January next year. But UEFA say the soul and governance of football are not assets to trade.
At the moment, I get the feeling that FIFA is only there to make a profit. I mean, it feels as though they're just trying to make money through every possible channel. To be honest, I think it's good to hear that UEFA called it a crisis meeting. I'm not a fan of boycotts. I'm actually always in favor of dialogue. But if it comes to that, then I would actually be in favor of us as Europe standing firm and saying, no, we won't go along with that. That's not our sport. That's not what we want, and then take action against it.
Threats to boycott tournaments like the World Cup have historically echoed a long history of football colliding with geopolitics. For now, the debate continues as many ask whether the so-called beautiful game has a price tag. Wandi Swandengendo, Al Arabia English.
A reminder of our top stories. The US blasts Iran in retaliation for striking their bases in Jordan, but Pakistan mediators believe they can still bring both parties together. Meanwhile, 8 people are dead in Ukraine after Russia launches drones and missiles days after Zelensky's meeting with President Trump. And UEFA votes to boycott the World Cup if FIFA sells stakes in its competitions. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also follow us on X. We'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.